Well, it's a problem a lot of people just don't know about. We're talking about stolen guns used for violent crime. Guns that are often stolen from police officers. And it's something that's hit very hard here in the Bay Area. The gun that killed Kate Steinle on Pier 14 was stolen. So what's being done about it? Senior investigative reporter Stephen Stock is with us. And Stephen, among the many questions, do local cops get reprimanded for leaving their guns unattended?
Most of the times, no, Raj. Nationwide, we discovered nearly 2 million lost or stolen guns reported to the FBI just in the last 10 years alone. Among the people who've had their guns stolen are, as you mentioned, police officers. In fact, experts say police guns are often targeted for theft just because criminals know they can then use those weapons in other crimes.
Kate stopped and wanted to take a selfie.
Kate Steinle's parents, Jim and Liz, can't forget that day back in July when a bullet ricocheted off the pavement at San Francisco's Pier 14 and killed her.
A shot rang out and she turned to me and said, "Help me, Dad."
The Steinles shared their story with NBC Bay Area's Raj Mathai as their case intensified a national debate over immigration policy. A debate that focused on the man charged in Kate's killing, Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez, an undocumented immigrant who'd been picked up by federal authorities. But Lopez Sanchez was later released from a local jail because San Francisco is a sanctuary city and will not hold people on federal immigration charges.
That's carelessness. I mean, it's pure and simple.
Today, the Steinle's family attorney, Frank Petrie, isn't talking about the controversy over sanctuary cities, but about another detail from Kate's death that has received far less attention.
She'd be here today if somebody took the simple precaution, which was required, of keeping that gun locked.
Officials say the gun used to kill Kate Steinle had belonged to a federal officer, a U.S. Bureau of Land Management ranger. It was stolen after it had been left unsecured in a backpack in a vehicle, an apparent violation of BLM policy.
I mean, we need to know that when law enforcement officers are given the privilege to carry around weapons, that they are going to be held to the requirements that are imposed in making sure that they're secured and not easily available for criminals to use in crimes.
This isn't the only case of a police officer losing his or her gun to theft. A 4-month-long investigation by NBC Bay Area uncovered hundreds of police-issued weapons lost or stolen and put back onto our streets during the last 5 years.
They're a sure target. Where there is a cop, there is a gun.
Matthew Harris retired after nearly 25 years as a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. For the last 3 years, he served as Chief Security Officer at FJC Security Services in Long Island, New York.
Because let's face it, these guns aren't being stolen for people to target shoot. They aren't being stolen by legal residents or people who otherwise can go into a gun store and purchase guns. They're being stolen by criminals to be used by criminals to be used in crimes.
We asked for a list of lost and stolen guns from major police departments throughout the Bay Area, from San Francisco's police department to Berkeley's, California's Highway Patrol to Santa Clara and San Mateo's sheriff's offices. From those agencies alone, we found 58 guns that have been lost or stolen in the last 5 years. All but a handful of those weapons have never been recovered. The Federal Drug Enforcement Agency told us their officers reported lost or stolen 134 guns in the last 5 years.
From time to time, we have become aware of organizations that steal firearms that target law enforcement officers.
Graham Barlow is resident agent in charge at the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Sacramento Field Office.
Very often, stolen firearms fuel other crimes. They're specifically targeted for other crimes.
Barlow says it's not just guns stolen from cops, but also weapons stolen from everyday legal gun owners that are a safety risk for everyone. According to the FBI, in the last decade alone, more than 1 million guns were reported stolen nationwide. We obtained this trace list of all guns lost or stolen in California since 2010. Of the 65,000 guns on the list, 58,000 were stolen. In the Bay Area alone, 268 guns were stolen just in the first 2 months of this year.
Firearms are highly sought after, and there are rings that we have worked and continue to work that specifically are looking for firearms and specifically targeting houses or persons because they believe that they are firearms owners.
Including law enforcement.
Including law enforcement, absolutely.
Here's the problem. It's far too easy for this stuff to go underreported so that nobody knows. There is no good inventory control over what weapons are issued to who and keeping track of them.
In fact, we did find one police department that did just that, kept track of the guns it lost. Not only did San Jose's police department do an inventory and an audit of all its guns back in 2010, it was transparent, open, and honest about what the department found. And it wasn't good.
We discovered that we have about 300 guns that are unaccounted for. Totally unacceptable.
Deputy Chief Fan Yo is in charge of the San Jose Police Gun Range and weapons training and inventory.
Well, I'm always concerned when we have about 300 guns that are unaccounted for, and we're doing our best to ensure that that situation doesn't occur again in the future.
Even so, hundreds of guns remain unaccounted for. Only about 20 have been recovered.
Is that a problem?
Absolutely. It is something that we're concerned about.
Frank Petrie applauds San Jose's police department and wishes other law enforcement agencies would follow San Jose's example.
So these things keep happening, and shame on us because we aren't putting pressure on our legislators to do something about this.
Now, to this day, Frank Petrie says Kate Steinle's family cannot get any answers from the Federal Bureau of Land Management. They still don't know if that officer whose gun was stolen was punished or even reprimanded for apparently violating agency policy. We asked for the data 4 months ago from many police departments, but we never heard back from Oakland's police department or even from the Federal Bureau of Land Management. The only other agency that would admit to doing an audit of its guns was California's Highway Patrol, and they would not share with us what their yearly audits of their missing guns shows.
Disheartening, especially for the victims here.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Stephen. This was prompted by our investigation. We discovered those lost and stolen police weapons are on the streets unaccounted for. We aired this story on Monday, and the response has been swift. Senior investigative reporter Stephen Stock is with us. And Stephen, this is now on the national radar.
Absolutely, Raj. We began our investigation after the death of Kate Steinle on Pier 14 in San Francisco back on July 1st of this year. Officials say the gun used to kill Steinle belonged to a federal officer, a U.S. Bureau of Land Management ranger. It had been stolen after it had been left unsecured in a backpack in a vehicle, in apparent violation of BLM policy. Now, to find out exactly how many law enforcement guns do go missing, we filed public records requests with major law enforcement agencies in the Bay Area, as well as the state and federal government. Not every police department complied, but we did find from the half dozen who did give us records, we discovered 58 missing police weapons since 2010. Plus, the DEA reported 134 unaccounted for guns. San Jose's police department reported another 324 unaccounted for guns. That's more than 500 guns. Now, since our story first aired, we learned that ICE agents also lost 165 weapons since 2006. Experts tell us the vast majority of these stolen weapons taken from cops are used by criminals in future crimes. And as we mentioned in the report, Raj, more than 1 million guns are lost and stolen every year nationwide. As for San Francisco, according to the records we obtained, 10 guns were stolen from police officers since January 2010, mostly through home and auto burglaries. Raj?
All right, Stephen, those numbers are staggering.
And just in, new numbers involving Mr. Firearms connected to ICE and FBI agents. Senior investigative reporter Stephen Stock first broke this story. He's here with more now for us. Stephen.
Jessica, we just got this latest data today from the FBI. So far, we have covered more than 700 guns, 711 to be precise, lost or stolen by law enforcement agencies just within the last decade or so. This case involving a gun stolen from an ICE agent's car in San Francisco is not the first time that agency has had a gun stolen or lost by an agent. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials tell us their agents had lost or stolen 144 weapons nationwide since 2005. At least 25 of those weapons were lost or stolen from agents located here in California, and at least 3 of them from here in the Bay Area. We filed public records requests with all the major law enforcement agencies in the Bay Area, local, state, and federal. We also got an update from the FBI. That agency reports losing or having had stolen 53 weapons nationwide since 2013. That includes a grenade launcher and 2 submachine guns. At least 2 of those FBI lost or stolen guns, a pistol and a rifle, came from agents based here in San Francisco. Now, our investigation also discovered that all but a few of those guns are never recovered, and most of the guns stolen from cops are taken by criminals to be used in the commission of other crimes. One other important note, this is the 4th homicide since July here in the Bay Area alone where a gun stolen from someone from a vehicle has been directly linked to the crime, and 2 of those cases involved guns stolen from law enforcement officers who left their guns in the car. Guys?
Now, these shootings grab the headlines, of course, shake our communities to the core when this happens, and it happens often.
But experts tell us they mask another reality, which is gun violence, which is what Dianne Feinstein was talking about. The issue, though, is complex. The numbers, though, are real. Senior investigative reporter Stephen Stock reveals some of the data that you've got and some of the statistics and put this in perspective for us.
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to do, put it in perspective, because days like today are tragic for those victimized by this violence, and no one diminishes the effect of mass shootings on our collective emotions. But according to the feds, these type of shootings make up less than 1% of all the deaths in America involving guns every year. It's a scene that many say is becoming too familiar in America these days. But exactly how common are these events in real numbers? Well, it depends on who is keeping track. According to the crowdsourced website Reddit, Guns Are Cool, and its site shootingtracker.com, data compiled by individual contributors to that site shows that through November 27, 2013, there were 331 mass shootings, resulting in 452 people dead, 1,171 wounded. ShootingTracker.com shows 301 mass shootings through the same time in 2014, with 339 people dead, 1,109 wounded. Through the same time this year, the website shows 351 mass shootings of 4 or more people, with 447 people dead, 1,292 wounded. Everytown USA tracks it a bit differently. The group was started and funded by former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. It counts 4 or more people killed, not including the shooter. Everytown USA shows 141 mass shootings in America since 2009, including today's shooting. Everytown counts 21 mass shootings in America so far this year. No matter how you count it, experts say that's a lot of violence and carnage.
It's really shameful that Congress has refused to do anything when it comes to gun violence prevention in light of the horrific shootings we keep happening in this country, and the fact that the public overwhelmingly wants Congress to do something about this.
By the way, when you break down these numbers involving mass shootings, it's very interesting. 10% of these shootings involve a police officer being shot, as in this case. 15% involve domestic violence issues. 4% involve workplace violence. Another 4% involves some type of school, colleges, elementary schools, or whatever. By the way, almost 12,000 people a year are killed in America through handguns.
And it's really interesting with this particular shooting because now we're hearing that one of the people involved may have been a woman, which is uncommon for these type of mass shootings.
And it brings in perhaps domestic violence, but it is uncommon. That's right. Usually it's a male involved and exclusively a male.
So the way those numbers are is essentially since 2013, one of the formulas is we've had a mass shooting in this country every week.
Day. Almost every day in the last year.
At least once a week.
That's right.
Since 2013.
Right. That's exactly right.
Okay, Stephen, thank you very much.
So mass shootings are more common these days. Just last Friday, of course, there were 2 mass shootings incidents, one that made national headlines in Colorado.
Now, we wanted to see if this is a trend, so we asked senior investigative reporter Stephen Stock to look for some answers.
According to both the FBI and the Centers for Disease Control, over the last decade, America has seen an increase in the number of these type of mass shootings. But in the last 3 years in particular, depending on how you defined a mass shooting, the number of these shootings has gone up or remained stable. Regardless, no matter how you calculate it, there are a lot of these mass shootings in America every year. The news out of San Bernardino shocks. 14 dead, at least that many wounded. The third mass shooting in America since Friday. While mass shootings continue to grab headlines around the United States, firearms experts tell us the massive media attention given to these events only shows a small part of the overall picture of gun violence in America today. According to numbers from the FBI and the Centers for Disease Control and an analysis of those numbers by the group Everytown USA, while there have been at least 141 mass shootings in the U.S. since 2009, 21 so far this year, those shootings only make up less than 1% of all deaths due to guns each year in the U.S. Everytown USA defines mass shootings as 4 or more deaths, not including the shooter. Instead, according to the CDC, during the latest full-year data is available, 2013, there were 11,208 homicides with a firearm, 21,175 suicides, and 84,962 injuries. A closer look at those numbers shows in most homicides tracked by the FBI, they involved handguns, at least 5,782 of them. Only 716 of those incidents involved rifles, shotguns, or other types of firearms.
It's a societal issue. It's an issue that's far beyond the scope of ATF or law enforcement. Every time we have one of these situations where we look at it, the solutions are in education, the solutions are in employment. It's a multifaceted issue.
Officials with the U.S. Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives tell us that the proliferation of all these firearms makes it almost impossible to keep up.
When you look at the number of crimes committed with firearms in this country, and you look at the number of ATF agents that we have, we just don't have the time to dedicate to each case that we would like to.
Even though these mass shootings do make news and headlines every time they happen, and they're very tragic, gun violence experts say the reality is they still make up a very small percentage of the number of gun murder victims in America every year. In fact, they say the numbers show they make up less than 1% of all homicides by guns. I'm Stephen Stock, NBC Bay Area News.
It's much deeper than gun violence and socioeconomics. As Oakland continues to boom, there's a bust on the other side of town. Last year, 83 people were murdered.
And now many experts say the violence in Oakland has created a mental health crisis. Senior investigative Stephen Stock spent the last months with those on the front lines. And Stephen, it's such a complicated issue.
Absolutely, Jess. We discovered 2 Oaklands when we walked the streets there. The booming new home to high-tech companies, and the neighborhoods in those high-tech companies' shadows still struggling with record violence, where residents deal with a problem experts now say is similar to veterans returning home from war.
Oakland is really a beautiful city.
In the shadow of the homes of high-tech tenants such as Uber, Ask, and Pandora.
This is where it starts at.
We walk the streets of East Oakland.
So I see cops already here. Is this a nightly occurrence?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Where residents say they've been left behind.
There was money here, it moved out.
We met John Jones here. He grew up in this neighborhood where he said there was little hope and lots of drugs and violence.
The further removed you are from downtown, the further east you go, the deeper east, you'll see the transition in these neighborhoods.
Right.
This, according to more than a dozen people we talked to, is ground zero for the problem of gun violence in America. On streets like this one, where guns are a way of life.
Now, I'm not talking about like just one set of gunfire. Like it could be 3 or 4 or 5 different sets of shooting.
We walked past the spot where last September 2 people were gunned down.
Every night, just all kind of guns.
And in a 6-block radius around where we walked, another half-dozen people had been murdered since October, all with guns.
You get to a point where you can begin to identify them. Well, that's a 9mm right there. Okay, that's a 12 gauge. Oh, that's an AK. Well, that's a Tech 9.
In the same time period in this neighborhood, Oakland police also made 37 different arrests on gun charges, another 946 assault charges.
And then you start hearing about, oh, well, such and such got killed last night.
This is the reality for John Jones and his neighbors.
3 people got shot this time, right?
Jones himself got caught up in the gun violence cycle. He served time for his involvement in a gun murder as a teenager.
And then it started getting close to home when it started being your friends.
Our investigative unit mapped the numbers. Of the 30 murders in Oakland since last August, all but 5 happened either in West or East Oakland, mostly along or near International Boulevard. Similar clustering can be found for arrests involving guns and assaults.
No child in America should have to go through this. Not in America, the most wealthiest nation on earth.
As Jones showed us around his old stomping ground,
My family has been on 89th since the 70s, right?
we met up with Tim Smith and his 8-year-old son.
You've seen 5 dead bodies now in East Oakland. My little guy, right?
That's right, Tim Smith's 8-year-old son has already seen 5 people shot dead.
I mean, we come out of the store and the body is on the ground. And you're telling your guy, hey, look over here, and it's inescapable.
That's more than most of us see in a lifetime. The data also shows this violence can almost be a daily presence in the lives of people who live here. Looking at Oakland ShotSpotter numbers, we discovered that in the first 9 months of last year, nearly 10 shots a day were fired on average.
There's this saying I always share with people: hurt people hurt people.
In fact, medical experts now say they see clear evidence of mental trauma among residents of neighborhoods in cities such as Oakland. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
It's absolutely true that people have PTSD.
And Mark serves as executive director at Youth Alive, based in Oakland.
It's not the same as a soldier. A soldier goes to war and they come home. Caitlin is working on the architecture.
Marks is a specially trained psychological counselor who deals with the results of this violence while trying to break the cycle.
We work with young people who get shot, go to the hospital, get their treatment, come back to the same community, maybe the same home where they were shot in front of.
Youth Alive visits every family victimized by gun violence in Oakland. Their crisis response team is often at the home of the victim's family before police are finished investigating.
So there's no post to the traumatic stress, right? It's continuing traumatic stress disorder, and that's unique.
Post-traumatic stress is very real.
Just ask Lorraine Taylor.
But when I read the scripture...
Taylor lost both her twin boys in shootings on the streets of Oakland back in February 2000.
I sat on my bed the other day and I just broke down because I miss them so much.
Taylor turned her grief into energy and passion to found the group 1,000 Mothers.
Hello, are you Marlene? I am. Hi, Marlene, I'm Lorraine.
Providing support to families who've lost loved ones to gun violence.
You know, some weeks are hard, so I had a hard week. But other than that, we're doing okay. Yeah.
Every day I get a call. Last night I was on the phone with a father who just can't handle it.
Post-traumatic stress disorder. You most often hear about PTSD.
And as the investigative unit first reported back in 2014 in partnership with the investigative group ProPublica, Chicago found more than half of its gunshot wound victims had signs of PTSD. And a study of nearly 8,000 Atlanta residents found about 30% had symptoms consistent with PTSD, a rate as high or higher than veterans returning from war.
Do you think you have PTSD?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Without a doubt. Like I say, if I go into a restaurant, a store, a business, I cannot sit with my back to the door. I don't like to sit with my back to a window. Like even when I'm on the streets now, that's why I'm looking around. I don't like having my back to traffic. Just too much.
Just too much. Experts are only now beginning to talk about treating these residents for PTSD, saying this cycle of violence has created a little publicized mental health crisis. that many cities are only now starting to address. And you can learn a lot more about this. Just go to our website, NBCBayArea.com. We have a lot more on this entire problem.
No way to live and no way to raise a child.
No
for
way
sure.
to live. That's right.
Thank you, Stephen.
Well, Oakland is in the international spotlight right now with the success of the Warriors game 2, of course, on Sunday night. But it's also been the target of Donald Trump's derogatory statements about how unsafe the city is.
Now, the numbers show that crime is actually down across Oakland, but there's also a widening disparity that experts say contributes to the cycle of violence in Oakland. Here's senior investigative reporter Stephen Stock with more. Stephen, what'd you find?
Raj, we found a vibrant and booming part of Oakland where high-tech companies are now moving and jobs are plentiful. But nearby, we also found another part of Oakland that still lags far behind the rest of the city, where the only boom comes from the sounds of guns.
Everybody hold your mouthpiece up.
From coaching football to neighborhood youngsters, to raising his family on these streets. 54-year-old Todd Walker has invested his entire life in Oakland.
This is the mouthpiece that be in your mouth when you're in the casket.
Walker should know about putting mouthpieces in the bodies in caskets. While he's volunteered as a football coach for 20 years, he earns his living as a funeral home assistant.
It's the worst feeling in the world.
And over the years, Walker has buried more than 20 of his teenage football players.
Spines on me! Spines on 3! 1, 2, 3, spines!
Every one of them shot to death on the streets around the fields where they once played.
I mean, this is a kid that you probably held as a baby. Now you rolling them in a casket. It's sad.
While the overall crime rate in Oakland is down, don't tell that to Christopher Ellis.
It's sad.
His 14-year-old son, Davon, a rising football star, was murdered on these streets in February 2015.
I don't allow any of my kids to walk down the streets of East Oakland anymore.
Less than 5 miles away from the coach's whistle lives a very different kind of Oakland. A booming economy with new headquarters for high tech opening in downtown every month. Unemployment at 8%. High-paying jobs growing by 3% and more. Murder, assaults, and gun arrests much less a problem here. Close by along Highway 13, what we're calling the Oakland Hills, the disparity grows even greater. Unemployment at 6% and dropping, where the average salary is 3.5 times what it is in East Oakland, and where they only had 1 murder, 4 gun arrests, and 45 assaults since last August. Contrast that to East Oakland with 26 murders, 90 gun arrests, more than 1,000 assaults, where the latest U.S. Census data shows 18% unemployment, average earnings just half of the citywide average, and 21,000 people living below the poverty line.
You have highly impacted poor communities.
Dr. Howard Pinderhughes is Associate Professor of Social and Behavioral Sciences at UCSF.
Where businesses have left, where government has essentially pulled out, and that you've had a large-scale public and private disinvestment in those communities.
He also works with Oakland's Prevention Institute, dedicated to finding solutions to the root causes of inner-city violence.
That's why we call it structural violence, because it happens as a result of government, either policy, economic policy, or neglect.
What's your administration doing to fix this? So we decided to ask government leaders about exactly that.
It is not just one thing. It is a robust economy that provides opportunities for those who have been left out in the past.
Mayor Libby Schaaf grew up in Oakland, lived here all her life. She recognizes the economic disparities that still divide her city.
And that's why we also are looking at these root causes of crime. And by that I mean better jobs, better educational outcomes. We're looking at really building the economy in Oakland in an equitable way.
Schaaf points to the reduction in the crime rate to say that some progress has already been made.
That's our ticket out this neighborhood.
But in our time walking the streets, we discovered that attempts to bring prosperity to these neighborhoods also carries another cost. As some of these neighborhoods improve, housing and land costs are skyrocketing, forcing many longtime residents out.
We see some of the displacement happening, and the only way that that doesn't happen is through very planned, mindful approaches.
How do you get the money that is coming into downtown Oakland very well? How do you get that out into these communities?
Oakland has an affordability crisis right now, and it's not just about the cost of housing. It's about the ability for our residents to afford that housing.
If you ask the average teenager in streets of Oakland, they'll tell you, there's nothing for us to do.
For residents like Christopher Ellis, it's too late. He's already lost a son. He's afraid if more isn't done, and soon, he'll lose his community.
When you send a loved one out, the last thing you tell them is be safe. And that's because you know now, they might not come back.
To that end, the mayor says her administration has already secured $23 million for Oakland Promise, a program which will pay for low-income Oakland youth to go to college. But the mayor says much more needs to be done. That's why Oakland has become part of a national movement that is now taking a public health approach towards dealing with all this violence. It's an effort that Mayor Schaaf says will take years and the entire community to solve. We'll stay on this story. Raj, Peggy.